do not reflect the views of KDVS, KDVS sponsors, or the University of California. Good afternoon, listeners. My name is Francisco Dominguez, the Radio Informar. Really happy to be here today. We have a very special guest today. His name is Luis Rodriguez. He's going to be calling in a few minutes. He's a great poet and author, a novelist. Also, he's a political activist. So we have a great show coming up. I'm going to play one song to start off like I usually do. And I have the Neville Brothers queued up. And we're going to start off with Brother Blood, the great Neville Brothers. So we're going to be right back. Luis is going to be calling in. And thank you for tuning in to KDVS 90.3 FM here in Davis, California. Luis Rodriguez is a poet, novelist, and activist. He was the 2014 Los Angeles Poet Laureate. Luis is the author of numerous books, including the award-winning Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in L.A. Luis is the founder of Tia Chucha's Centro Cultural in a San Fernando Valley Cultural Center. Currently, Luis is running for the governor of California. Good afternoon, Luis.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start with a poem.
That would be great. That would be great.
This poem goes like this. When a poet appears, the earth springs into song. Flowered with new hope, a bright beginning, even from a terribly seeded past, where dust and stones are bare, sowing ground. Poets know there's a design to their lives braided with threads of the future. They don't just make and remake language, they are called to it, just as a solid and direct line can become fleeting or slanted. Aspiring to be a poet, you become a poet, turning what's possible into what's next. Not just creating a nest for oneself made of familiar sounds that keep one comfortable, not just basking in the spotlight or the imagined power, but by cultivating words with courage, discipline, ferocity, poets carry this sacrifice with grace. Always remember the unrecoverable moments with loved ones, with family, while also giving to the whole, even at the expense of one's time, one's considerations. All proper sacrifices are rooted in the sacred. Blessed and cursed, loved and hated, seen well or lied about, no poet can escape the human energies that both destroy and lift up. Yet true poets are matched for this challenge. There is a poet seed planted before birth and carefully nurtured by angels, by elements, by the alignments of universal sway. You feel this in the bones. Somewhere the message is, I was meant to be here. The fact is, poetry is in everyone. It emerges from the human sea. Yet as deeper truths go, poets see further and feel deeper. Just like the rest of us, only maybe more. Turning time into learning, into passion, into revelation. They bargain with God for how to be in the world. Learning for learning, passion for passion, revelation for revelation.
Oh, thank you, Luis, for starting off with the poem. You know, I've been interviewing some poets on my show, and poetry is very special to me. I've always loved it, and actually I'm going to start writing some more. I got some things to write down here, and so thank you very much. And, I'm going to start the interview off with the question. Out of the different art mediums, you've chosen writing as I think your main one, but you also do painting. And so the question is, why poetry, and why poetry?
I think with poetry, it really is about voice, and it's about soul talk, as I call it. You can tell when they're writing, you can write a lot of things informational, you can do entertainment, you can do a lot of things. But with poetry, man, you're really getting into something deep. And I learned that growing up when I was reading all the poets coming up in the 60s. there was the beat poets in the 50s, but there was these great, mostly African-American, Puerto Rican, Chicano poets that were coming up, powerful words. I mean, like, Jose Montoya, for example, or Pedro Pietri from New York City, the New Yorican, or David Henderson and Nicky Giovanni, all these, Don Ali, Amiri Baraka, all these writers were coming up in the 60s, and they were talking soul, you know what I'm saying? And that's what I think I gravitated to. It was a deeper sense of language and sense of voice than just other kind of writing.
And in this country, we kind of go through cycles, whether it's history or art. The last interview I did was with Emory Douglas, the artist from the Black Panther Party, and he was talking about the Black arts movement in San Francisco that was happening, and the poets also. So you're talking about the 60s, and there was powerful stuff coming out at that time because of what was going on in our society. And so that was great that you were able to tune in to that. And
well, here's the story was. I was a troubled young man, as you know, if you read my memoirs. I was on heroin. I was homeless for 3 years. I was in and out of jail, juvenile hall. And the one thing that I really found as my refuge was the Central Public Library in downtown LA. I was walking in there, I would sleep wherever I could, abandoned cars, abandoned buildings along the LA River, people's homes. I'd sneak in, or somebody would invite me in backyards, vacant lots. I slept wherever I could, but during the day, I would walk into that library, and it was a magical place for me. Books were my saving grace. I don't know why I gravitated towards them. I think it's something within me. Maybe it matched the gift I had inside of me that I didn't know. I love reading, and I read everything I could. And the poets were coming out of there. Mostly those Black arts poets, those poets from the Black community, because Chicano poets were there, but they weren't as being published as much. And so I was gravitating to all that poetry, and it really... Don Ali, for example, who became my friend Haki Badabuti out of Chicago, has this great book. I hope I don't say it wrong. It's called Don't Cry, Scream. Powerful book. It impacted me. And then I began to read people like Perry Thomas, Down These Mean Streets, and Malcolm X, and all these writers. I would say that that's what saved me, that I could be in bad shape and have a library that I can go to. Black books never hurt me, never put me down, never beat me up, never attacked me. Books were the world that I really got into when the rest of the world was pretty harsh.
And then you started reading. After you started reading, then you started writing it down?
Yeah, so what happened is I was homeless in the streets for 15 to about 18 years old. But I really was really street when I was 15. And when I got to be 16, I got arrested and put in murder's row. And for some reason, I started to write. I mean, people were playing cards. They were talking and telling stories. Okay, when you're in murder's row, it's all people suspect of murder. They were trying to get me for the murders of three people that I never did, but it didn't matter. I'm sitting there. And I had a cell next to Charles Manson and everything. But what I gravitated towards was somebody had a pencil and a paper. I don't know where they got it. And I started writing. And that really was my favorite thing, sit there and just write. And it wasn't poetry that I knew about because I didn't know what poetry was. It was just my thoughts. It was just vignettes, anecdotes. It was just little things that eventually became part of what was running, if you read it. But that's where it was. It was me having read all those books and then sitting in jail and thinking, I want to do is write, I also, like you said, I did graffiti, I did art, I did murals, I did music. I tried to do music. I tried to be a photographer. I did a lot of things, but the writing is the one thing that never left.
Okay. And the prose that you write, that of course that's the poetry in there too, but how did you switch over? That transition?
Well, the first thing I had to do, I wanted to start working as a writer. I was working when I got out of the gang life, La Vida Loca, I had to work. So I worked in the industry. I worked in a smelter, a refinery. I was still working for 4 years. I did construction, and that's all good work. I learned welding, pipe fitting, plumbing, all kinds of stuff, but I was not. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So when industry started to leave, it was beginning to leave. It was in the late 70s. By the 80s, almost all the industry was gone, the major industry. I got out of there to start trying to work as a journalist. So in 1980, beginning in 1980, I walked into these East LA newspapers and said, I want to work. And they offered me very little money, but they did offer me a job to write, be a photographer, and also, answer the phones, take out the trash, and sweep the floors. And I did all that. And that's really what I wanted to do. I became a journalist so that I can be in the writing world. But I did poetry on the side. I went to poetry readings. You know what I'm saying. But the journalism was my first entry into prose. And that journalism helped me later when I wrote all my other prose books that I have, including even my fiction books, because, journalism is prose, and I had to be creative with it. So that's where that door opened for me, was having to work as a journalist.
Yes, Luis, do you have any of your early poems with you?
Well, I do.
Or whatever.
I can share
whatever you want to read.
share one with you.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to see if I can share one. Do you mind if I do one in Spanish?
No, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I'm going to share one as we're talking here. Because my earliest poems were actually written in bad Spanish, but I did write them. And I want to share one of the earliest poems that I ever did.
Okay.
And it's called Pedazo a Pedazo. And I actually put it in my first book, and I've shared it in other books. The interesting thing about this poem is that I was for years I've been going to prisons, teaching, writing, doing poetry, events, and everything. And I started going all over the country, and then I ended up going to Mexico, Central America, South America, Europe, teaching in prisons or going into prisons and doing events. So I was in this prison in Chihuahua where my family's from. And it was a rough prison because they had a riot in Ciudad Juarez at one of the prisons there, and over 20 people were killed. You know how bad those prisons could be. And they had all these guys, the side that got mostly killed, they put them in a special prison near Chihuahua, and I happened to walk in there. And there was about 300 or 400 guys. And I'm talking, and for some reason the warden comes in, and I didn't know it at the time, but he had never been inside that prison. Because a lot of these prisons, they just guard the periphery. You know how that goes. You know what I'm saying? And these guys don't got nothing. So all of a sudden, he walks in with a bodyguard, and all the prisoners stood up and kind of ignored me and started complaining to him, yelling at him, ranting about this, no food, no hay talleres, nothing to do, no tenemos comida, no tenemos nada. And I realized, at least my gut feeling was, oh no, they're going to kidnap him and me. This is, you don't play in these places. He said, oh no, they're going to kidnap us. And the warden got scared, and that bodyguard wasn't going to help nobody, So I decided to do what only thing I could do. I just read a poem. And I started doing more poems, one poem after another. Eventually, they started looking towards me, and I kept with my arms up, redoing poems. And the warden walked away, which is good. And pretty soon, I took back that audience, And we just kept talking and talking. So I'm going to read you the poem that I did, one of my earliest poems. It's called Pedazo a Pedazo. Pedazo a pedazo te desgarran, pelándote capas de tu ser, mintiendo sobre quién eres, hablando por tus sueños. En el escuador de sus ojos eres un criminal, vistiéndote en una chaqueta de mentiras, hecha de acero a la medida, eres su retrato perfecto. Quítatela, haz tu propio manto, desafía a los interrogadores, observa bien la muerte en su mirada, di que no te rendirás, di que no les creerás cuando te nombran de nuevo, di que no aceptarás sus reglas, sus colores, sus morales depravados. Aquí tienes un camino, aquí puedes cantar la victoria, aquí no eres una raza conquistada, la víctima perpetua, un rostro sombrío en la tormenta. manos y mente están esculpiendo un santuario. Usa estas armas contra ellos. Usa tus talentos dados. No son de piedra. So that saved me that day. I didn't think it was going to work. It happened to work. Could have gone completely bad, but it turned out that that's what kept people interested, and we kept talking and talking. And that's how easy things can turn in these kind of studies. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So yeah.
Luis, you've taken the time to go into the prisons and jails, and this is something I didn't know.
Yeah.
Youth authorities.
Yeah.
To work with people that are locked up and that don't have very much,
Right.
And,
right. And I did it because I felt, I was in jails and then out of a juvenile hall and everything, but I escaped all the big, huge prison terms that a lot of my homies didn't. 30, 40, 50 years. I've been in these California prisons where I've seen homies that I hadn't seen in 30, 40 years in prison since then. I felt like I was fortunate. I escaped because I got into social justice, because I got into the movimiento. You know what I mean? This movimiento and books were my savior, the art and the books, as well as the movement, social justice struggles of our gente. That pulled me out. People got me out of La Vida Loca because now I had a purpose to change the world. And it was important, but I never forgot those guys. You know what I'm saying? These men and women. I never forgot them. So 40 years, I've been doing this for 40 years. And in 1980, I started my first workshop in Chino Prison, working with others, but it was a creative writing class. And I've been going to prison one form or the other since then. The last time I was teaching many, many years creative writing at Lancaster State Prison, which is in LA County. And again, like I said, I've gone to prisons all over. So this is important. Juvenile halls, probation camps. I work with so many people, women's prisons as well as men's. And I love that work, and it's kept me going. And the sad thing is, my own son ended up being in a gang, got in trouble. He did close to 15 years in prison. So it impacts me and my family, too. And just to put another sad note to it, I have a granddaughter. She's 28 years old next month. She's in jail right now. She became a crystal meth head, fentanyl, all these drugs. So this means a lot to me personally, but also whatever I can do to help anybody that gets caught up in that world, I do what I can to give them the keys to liberation through thinking, through feeling, through poetry, through art, whatever way I can.
Yes. Luis, on our prior phone conversation, you told me that you worked with at-risk youth.
Yeah.
Doing a healing circle.
Yeah.
And actually you worked with youth this afternoon. Could you tell us about that and what these young people that you're working with, what are they going through?
So me and my wife have been doing this for a while. My wife, Trini, has been working with women's healing for over 20 years. And as you know, we both are into our indigenous spiritual practices.
Yes.
Native American as well as from the Mexica and other, cultures around, south of the border. And she's worked with curanderas. I've known a lot of people. So people ask us to come and do these circles. And today was with these young people who are, Chicanx, Latinx, they're mostly Mexican, Chicanos. I think the one was Salvadorian. There's a number of the different countries, but they're all hungry. They don't know their roots. I think we resonated with some stories that they have about their parents who actually try to introduce them to some herbal medicines. But again, they're all been colonized. All of us, like me and you and everybody, have been colonized to think that the medicine comes from institutions. It comes from a third parties. It comes from profit-making corporations, you know what I'm saying? Yes. Instead of that, it's in everywhere. It's in nature. Nature has a lot of bountifulness of medicine. It's in our relationships, the beautiful relationships we have, not just with human beings, but even with animals, with plants, with all these natural things, relationships we have with each other, wherever we consider divine. These are things that our indigenous ancestors, what we call ancestral knowledge, has been brought down to us. And that's what we're teaching them. That's what we're showing them. The healing and the medicine is everywhere. Sometimes they feel lost. They feel detached. They feel suicidal. Some of them are using crystal meth and drugs. And we're trying to tell them all that is not the real medicine. The medicine is inside of you, but also the way it interacts with other people, with nature, with your own nature. It's important teaching so that people know to keep going, to stay strong, in spite of, like you said, this is a rough world, man. We got war going on, the Ukraine getting invaded. We have the pandemic everywhere. We have homelessness is getting worse than ever. Everything's unraveling. You know what I'm saying? And yet, our teaching is that when things unravel, we have to be the dreamers and the weavers. We have to reimagine everything, as young people have been saying, and then reweave everything so that it can get back to the way it should be.
Yes, and the reason I asked that because it must be hard being a young person today because of our society and our world and the things people have to deal with, and it seems like it's getting rougher out there.
It is, because what's really interesting. When I was young and I was on heroin and I was like in pretty bad shape, what I found out after all, that's 50 years ago, whatever it was. It's expansive now. It's extended. Everybody's on heroin now. You know what I'm saying? It used to be a thing. There was a few junkies, a few tecatos. We knew each other. It was all mostly barrio people. Every once in a while, of course, it was black people, and every once in a while you have some white people. But mostly it was barrio people. We found our fellowship with the drug, and not too many people were into it, And then the years go by, and I have a granddaughter. One of my granddaughters is into crystal meth and fentanyl. It's like, it's accessible. We got neighborhoods where you can get any drug in the world. I don't care what the drug laws are. I don't care what the drug war is. I don't care what you can get any drug you want. You can get any gun you want, but they can't get a book to own. They can't get proper medicine that is available, but they don't know where it is. And it's really sad that we live in that kind of world. I think that's what you're pointing out. I think what's rough about the young people now is all the stuff is accessible everywhere. And even in universities and colleges, there's no place that young people can avoid this kind of world. And it's really hard, but they got to make those decisions. What am I going to do? Am I going to be a revolutionary, healed, active, but a real warrior, or am I going to succumb to what society has given me?
Yes. Luis, this next question, and you can feel free to read, poetry at any point, while you're talking. You can just go right into a poem.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to ask you about the Centro Cultural de Achuchas that you started, and and the power of culture. We live in a time where, like what the young people are going through today, and the power of culture and the power of art, and how that can transform, just like the poetry, the visual arts, danza, different things. And could you talk about why you started this center?
Exactly for that. It was Jose Montoya that coined the phrase "la cultura cura," and it's being used among all these circles that we work with. And it meant that, in culture, in art, in our expression, in our shaping is the cure. And I think it's important for people. That means you got to have agency. You just can't be being bombarded, and not know that you can begin to find ways to reshape the world that others have made. I think that's part of what the cultura is. The culture is what we make of the world. The culture is human beings interacting with nature and remaking it. But you got to do it in accord with nature. That's what they don't teach you. And so people do culture sometimes, but it's counter to nature. It's counter to our climate, counter to our own health. But we do it in accord. And so we teach all our young people. We have a great community. It's all the arts. We teach music, dance, theater, writing. We have Mexica danza, Aztec dance. We have indigenous cosmology. We teach the Nahuatl language. We also have books. We're the only bookstore for 500,000 people, all raza, 500,000 people that got no bookstore except for us. We have films. We're the only theater house for 500,000 people. You know how it is in our neighborhoods. There's nothing there. There's no cultural cafes. There's no, there's murals, which is amazing, and there's other stuff, but we don't have the kind of places, the theaters. You have to leave your neighborhood to get into the arts, and that's why we created a space like this. And I hope it's a kind of a model that everybody can see. Every neighborhood needs a place like Tia Chucha's. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
it was named for my tia because she was the independent woman, creative. She did poetry. She did painting. She did proverbs. She created her own perfumes. She was never married because she said, I never want a man to tell me what to do. You know, she was and it's hard in the 50s and 60s for a Mexicana to be so independent. So everybody called her crazy. I mean, la loca, you know what I mean? Which is not true. She wasn't crazy. But that's what they would say so that nobody could near her because they didn't like that spirit permeating the rest of us, you know. But she was my creative model, my creative furnace. She fired up my own creative furnaces to her spirit, and I wanted to name everything for her because I wanted to honor that, you know, that we don't lose that kind of independent, innovative, creative way of being.
Yes, I went to Tia Chucha's. It was probably 15 years ago. There was some event. I don't even quite remember what it was, but it was so beautiful because you had all these young people there having a great time, you know,
Yeah,
and
people have a great time.
having a great time. There
And
was
not be hurting and not thinking about somebody coming after them with guns.
exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, there's no violence. Everybody's there loving each other, caring for each other, hearing each other. That's what we've had. We've created this. I guess it's like an oasis in a terrible desert of cultural desert, and people really gravitate, and young people in particular, because again, they're hungry to know, they're hungry to connect.
Yes. Luis, this next question has to do with the times that we're in right now, with COVID-19 also, and the state of the arts, because everything has kind of slowed down, specifically because of COVID. And then now, we have a new war that just jumped off last night, major war with major death, and very tragic. So where does the artist pick up from here?
I learned something from some of my teachers, and one of them is that one of the things that art does, besides heal and besides transform, it also helps point the way. All art is like a beacon in the darkness. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I would say for especially revolutionary-minded artists, how can your art show us the way to go, illuminate the path where we need to go? I see it as that's part of its importance to give people that light in the middle of all this terrible stuff we're seeing. People get depressed, get dark, everything gets black in our hearts and in our minds, and you got to have that light that says, wait a minute, here's a way out of this. And that's what I think all poets and all fiction writers and journalists, as well as artists and dancers, and they would keep pointing the way. I think with indigenous people, they knew that songs pointed the way. It opened the door to spirit world, just like ceremony. All these things were important, and I would like to bring all that back so we know we can have access to that spirit that will allow us to keep strong in ourselves, in the world that we're in. So I think that's what one of the big jobs is for all artists and writers and dancers and theater people and everybody, to look at musicians and to look at how we can point the way to the way we need to go. Again, reweaving and redreaming the world that we're in.
Yes, years ago, I came across some writings, and then some what elders would say back in the day, that like say that your your daughter was going to marry somebody, but that the elders would say, well, can this person you want to marry, can he sing?
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. It's a
And
great
and then
concept.
yeah, and then if he couldn't sing, that maybe you shouldn't marry him.
That's a really great idea. And I think it's great. It's similar to somebody could say, I've heard tribes say, can he dance? You
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the point. People who don't know how to express themselves this way get very hardened. And you don't want to live with that person. There's a lot of toxic masculinity, and it's a very real thing. And I have to deal with it because I'm dealing with guys in prison. I'm dealing with gang kids. Most of them are men, males, lost. They don't have no guidance, no elders. And we have to address this issue because it's hurting our women. It's hurting our children. It's hurting our whole community. It's also eating away at these people, these men. And I think that what you're pointing out is important. Learn to have a passion, an art, a dance, a song. It's really important. And I've learned to do that because I was one of those hardened kids. I used to be a very sensitive kid, like most kids. When I was growing up, I liked to be in my mind. I liked to play with my army men, my trucks, and everybody wanted me to play on the street. I didn't really want to, but I would go out there because everybody forced me. But then they made fun of me because I wanted to be in my mind. You know how it is. Men in the barrio could be hard on each other. You ain't tough enough. They would put you down. They'd call you names and a bunch of terrible things. And I got beaten down one time. I was 9 years old. I got jumped, and I was on the ground. And I promised myself I would never again be on the ground like that ever again. So humiliated. 9 years old, and sure enough, 2 years later, I'm in a gang. Now I'm tough. Now I got a gang. Now I'm fighting all the time. Now I'm getting arrested for, disturbing the peace, beating people up, eventually attempted murder, even a murder's row. If I didn't do it, it didn't matter. I'm already being pulled into that violent world where I won't let nobody mess with me. It distorts your humanity. It mutates you. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
that's the problem with a lot of men. We're mutated. And some people think this is the way to be. That's not the way to be. It's the way we've been forced to be. You wouldn't cry. You wouldn't. Now, it took me a long time to get back to my tears, get back to my own issues. If I have rage, I got to get to the grief beneath the rage because that's what all rage has. There's always grief underneath it. I have to learn how to do what you're saying, sing, get to dance before I try to do anything else. And that's lessons that I think we got to give all men, all people, young men and women, how to get back to that.
Yes. You just got me thinking about some stuff. Myself, I have my I have a side of me, where I'm a singer, but
Mm.
I've never sang on air, in my show.
Oh,
I always kept that
oh,
side of me kind of over
wow,
there,
there you go. Well,
That's
we have to hide it. It's kind of weird, huh?
yeah, yeah,
Sometimes we have to hide what we want to do because it's not cool. It's not. You can't make a living, and that's what they tell you. If you can't make a living, drop it. That's what I was told. Hey, man, just work. That's why I ended up in that industry. And then when the industry was leaving, I go, well, I might as well move towards my art. Industry's being pushed out anyway. You know what I mean?
yeah. So maybe maybe at some point I'll kick out some songs here on the air,
There you go.
because
That'd be great.
that would that's what's up. But
Yeah,
listening to you is what's the reason, because
yeah.
you made me realize something,
Good. Good.
Luis, we're running. Oh no, we still have a good 12, 13 minutes. Uh, do you have another poem that you brought?
Absolutely. And speaking of, I'm going to read this poem. It's actually to my mother. And the reason why I bring it up is my mother was rooted with the Tarahumara indigenous people of Chihuahua. And most Mexicans don't know their tribal roots.
Well,
And I was fortunate that my mother would always tell us, somos Tarahumaras. You know what I mean?
yes.
And it's sad because none of my brothers and sisters really cared about that. I'm the only one that listened. She had all these stories. And she didn't grow up traditional because she grew up in the ghetto called La Tarahumara in Chihuahua City, which is all the indigenous people that were being pushed out of their traditional lands. And when you're in traditional lands, Tarahumaras are known for running. They walk for hours. They eat the Three Sisters corn, squash, and beans. They're healthy. They don't get heart disease. They don't have diabetes. People done studies. They're not always in good shape because they do starve and there's periods where they can't get no food, but they find a way to survive and they stay pretty healthy. But as soon as they get pushed out and end up in these ghettos, um, they become sick, diabetic, alcoholics, heart disease, everything. As soon as they become civilized, they're in bad shape. And my mom, unfortunately, was one of those. And so when she was in her 20s, she lost all her teeth. They'd rotten away. She was obese. She had thyroid problems. She had diabetes. She had all kinds of issues, my poor mom. So one of the things she had is what this poem is written about. We moved to Watts when I was 2 years old, and Watts was my first community. I was there till about 8 years old. That's when I first went to school, where I first met my friends, and I have a great love for Watts as a community. It was black and brown, and Mexicans live with black people, and for the most part, we got along. It wasn't the kind of world that people think it was, but Watts was that community, and this is a poem of an early memory, and the poem is called "Heavy Blue Veins," Watts, 1959. Heavy blue veins streak across my mother's legs, some of them bunched up into dark lumps at her ankles. Mama periodically bleeds them to relieve the pain. She carefully cuts the engorged veins with a razor and drains them into a porcelain-like metal pail called a tina. I'm small, and all I remember are dreams of blood. Me drowning in a red sea, blood on sheets on the wall, splashing against the white pail and streams out of my mother's ankle. But they aren't dreams. It is Mama bleeding into day, into night, bleeding to birth the memory, my mother, my blood, by the side of the bed, me on the covers, and her slicing into a black vein and filling the pail into some dark, forbidding, red nightmare, which never stops coming, never stops pouring, this memory of Mama and blood and Watts.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, again for coming on to the show and sharing your words, your poetry. Luis,
Thank you.
This next question, well, you're running for the governor of California.
Yeah,
and, I know you ran in 2014.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I met you at the state capitol.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and
right.
And then now you're running again. And could you tell the listeners why you are running?
Well, as you can tell, the world seems to be broken up. You're either Democrat, Democrats are all in disarray. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Or you're Republican, and Republicans, unfortunately, are becoming consolidated, crazy. I don't know how else to call it. And I think they do it by design. I don't think they're falling into some really crazy things that some of them probably don't know they're doing it. Some know exactly what they're doing. But there's nothing in the middle for the rest of us. There's not enough voices or choices. And I feel like I have to fight for that ground that doesn't belong to Democrats or Republicans. Now, again, I'm willing to work with any Democrat, when you work with any Republican, actually, that wants to be part of this new third way, where we actually have real answers, where we're not caught with corporate ideals about what should be done. I don't get no corporate donations. I don't want any. I want just people power and people money and impacted people in what we do. So I'm talking about a different campaign. I'm not a politician in the normal sense. I'm a poet politician, if you want to call it. I'm somebody that is trying to put forward a whole new way of thinking. And I'm very fortunate that the Green Party, Peace and Freedom Party, and the Justice Party have united to support me as well as others in a slate. They call it the Left Unity Slate, and I have to thank them because they came to me. But I really think it's also anybody that wants to be part of this new possibility. So I'm challenging Newsom. I think Newsom, they say he's one of the best governors. He's a good governor. He's got a lot of things going for him, but I think he's got a lot that he's missing. There's so many gaps. You know what I'm saying? And I want to address those gaps, whether it's ending poverty, ending homelessness, making sure we have the environment that's totally clean and healthy for everybody, making sure that, in fact, we do have a single-payer universal health care, that we do have an educational system that really is diverse and brings in all the ethnic studies. And, yeah, let's get into the race theories and everything that people need to talk about. Yeah, it's just the world that we need, a world that's challenging, and not the world that's comfortable and maybe okay. We don't need a world that's okay. This state is very powerful. It's very beautiful. Amazing people, beautiful nature, and the fifth largest economy. And yet we got the highest poverty rate of any state in the United States. That doesn't equate in my mind as making sense. And I want to bring back that sense that we can eradicate these issues and bring forth all our people. It's called Imagine a New California for Shared Well-Being. Then let's build it. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes, I think we might have the most homeless in the United States.
We have the most homeless in the United States, which is ridiculous. LA County, for example, has 68 billionaires and 68,000 people living in the street. That and to me, it's like, oh, that's the way things are. No, these are man-made issues. These are things that we can do something about. This is not a natural disaster. This is a human-made disaster.
Yes, I was reading about they found somebody, a homeless person that had died in the streets, and they said the cause was natural causes.
Oh,
and I'm like, well, wait a minute here.
That's right.
This is not natural.
There you go.
It is not natural.
Right.
And
that's a good point, and we have to be clear about that, because I think these are things that we can avoid. These wars that we're getting into, oh my God! I mean, the world's becoming, like you say, unraveling, and our ancestors told us when things unravel, we have to reweave with what we have to keep things moving, and that's where I'm at.
Okay, Luis, would you like to? Well, would you like to read some more, or
yes, I would love to do another poem, and I'm gonna. This one is actually a sonnet, and it's got rhyme, which poetry can do all kinds of things, including be in meter and in rhyme, and this one's got both. I decided to. I was reading Shakespeare sonnets, by the way. I never used to read this stuff as a kid, but as an adult, I'm reading everything. And I decided to do a Shakespearean sonnet. So I'm going to share it with you. And it has issues that we're just talking about right now. And it goes like this. Praise to shoes on a homeless winter night. Praise to mothers who nurture without men. Praise to the bottom in a drug-mad flight. Praise to the poet who shatters with a pen. Praise to vibrant children in a static world. Praise to dreamers in cash-only exchanges. Praise to the tattered flag of justice unfurled. Praise to our nation's depth, breadth, and ranges. Praise to a restoring earth with global warming. Praise to large spirits even in cages. Praise to the new alignments now forming. Praise to anger with eyes not blind rages. There is much to praise if we are to last, the big within the small in the vast.
There we go. Yes. Is that something new that you've written?
That's actually in the last poetry book I have, which was came out when I was poet laureate in 2016. It's a beautiful book called Borrowed Bones, and I recommend people get whatever poetry they can, but get some of my poetry too. But there's a lot of great poetry out there.
Yes. Luis, I always ask at the end of the interview, do you have any advice for our young people of today, whether they be, we're on a college campus, where, KDVS broadcasts to the whole Sacramento Valley,
I think with young people, I really feel that they're moving in the right direction with some of their ideals. I mean, the young people carry the ideals that the society has forgotten. And that's what's frustrating with young people is that what happened to all the elders and all the teachers that really want the world the way it should be. They've gotten hardened. They say, yeah, don't bother with it. I think young people should hang on to those ideals, to those imaginations, but also begin to make the ground to realize them. And I think that's the next step. Young people need community. They do need teachers. They need to share among themselves and begin to build a new foundation for a new world. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Not just tear down the old one, and then all we do is have ruins we walk around in, but build the foundations of a new house and start building from there. I would encourage young people to do that part of the work. Don't lose the ideals, but let's build the ground underneath it to make those ideals really happen.
Okay, for the listeners, there you have it. The poet, the author, the activist, Luis Rodriguez from Los Angeles, California. Thank you, Luis, for taking your time for coming on Radio Informar. Have a nice evening, and thank you.
Thank you.
And thank your wife also, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, my wife, Trini. Abrazo Kamati. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
For the listeners, that was Luis Rodriguez. And you are listening to KDVS 90.3 FM, Radio Informar. We're very fortunate to have Luis on the show today. Once again, I want to thank Luis Rodriguez for coming on the show today. You know, at a certain point towards the end there, I got a tear in my eye, and I don't really know what it was, the poetry, just him talking, but powerful stuff. And I hope you had the opportunity to check it out today. I want to do a shout out to a couple of very special people. I want to do a shout out to my good friend Joan Kelly. It's been a little sick. And Joan, I hope you feel better. And also, I want to do a shout out to Larry Rodriguez, my homie, DJ Nonpareil, Flower Power, Flower Vato, you know, who helps me out with some music here on my show. And for all the people fighting a good fight out there, keep your head up. I'll be back in 2 weeks. We're going to end the show with the Neville Brothers. Also, I forgot to say that Luis Rodriguez is going to be one of the speakers, I think the keynote speaker, at the Cesar Chavez March and Rally this year in Sacramento. I don't know the exact date. It's at the end of March. The march starts from Southside Park, and then it's going to the state capitol. But he will be there. He's the keynote speaker. So thank you for tuning in to Radio Informar, KDVS 90.3 FM. I will be back live in 2 weeks. Keep your mask on. You know, COVID doesn't play. It doesn't discriminate. It's a very vicious thing. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to end it with the Neville Brothers, River of Life. See you in 2 weeks.